Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and to the territories beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and my co-host Matt Freeman is currently in the back, switching out the kegs. Matt, you're just gonna have to move faster. I'm just gonna have to light a fire under your ass.
Oh, shit.
This week on the show, our coverage of The Talisman continues with part 2 covering chapters 6 through 9 of the novel. Jack begins his journey, getting a quick glimpse of the dying queen before heading out on the road, immediately having to travel back to our world and ending up in the hands of the nefarious Smokey Updike. A lot happens this week, Matt. What did you think of this week's reading?
I loved it. I think that I liked the first bit of reading, but I was like, I don't quite love this book yet. This week's reading pushed me over the edge into getting why people enjoy this book, why people have been excited for us to get to this book. Just a whole bunch of really great stuff. As much trouble as I had with the notes last week, I just like found that I had no trouble with the notes at all this week. I was like, oh my God, like this is so interesting. There's so much to say about this, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this.
I'm a little worried about our episode length, surprising no one. It feels like there's a lot in these chapters. And I don't know, like I base this whole thing on page count, but of course every book is published a different way with a different font size on their pages, you know? And I'm starting to think, oh, maybe these are just literally more words per page than the other things I've been doing. Because, you know, when I'm going through these notes, I was just like, oh my God, there's so much stuff. I mean, we get all the way this week through the beginnings of the encounter with Smokey, and it's just like that happened in the same episode where Jack gets a look at the queen real quick and meets Farron. You know, it's just like there's a lot. There's definitely a lot.
Yeah, well, the story just moves really fast, and that's what makes it propulsive. That's what the hook is, actually.
I think you're right. I mean, I think if you go back and listen to last week's episode, I was focusing a lot on the writing specifically, and I think that's because I kind of agree with you. While I love this book, those first few chapters, it's just it is a slow roll kind of mood setting 80 pages or so. And then as soon as Jack hits the ground, he's off, you know. Yeah. But I was definitely focusing more on the writing last week than the plot, because plot wise, there's just not a lot happening. It's just kind of circling around this oncoming thing. But yeah, then we get right into this chapter and immediately zoom, and it does not slow down, Matt. It does not slow down.
Yeah, I do wonder if some of this sense of velocity we have at this point isn't because we had this sort of intentionally frustrating moseying about toward the beginning, you know?
Yeah, that absolutely could be, and maybe that's part of the point, that we take the time to kind of lull you into a tone and a pace of a book that is not going to be it, you know, for the rest of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right, but let's get right into it. We begin part 2, The Road of Trials. And Matt, before we get into the reading itself, I wanted to kind of take a step back here, because we talked about Joseph Campbell a lot last week. We talked about the hero's journey last week. I don't know how much our listeners are actually aware of these things, as like what the hero's journey is, what, you know, the monomyth is. And I thought we could like take a brief amount of time here to just kind of go over this at a very, very high level, just in case someone listening has never really studied Campbell and the monomyth and the hero's journey more than just like what general, you know, regular culture knows about these things.
Yeah. It's funny. It's been so long since we talked about this, but we actually had a whole episode on the Doofcast feed about this a long time ago.
We did.
But yeah, no, it's especially apropos because I decided this week that this story is extremely Odyssean. Yeah. As in based on the Odyssey, which is, you know, yet another historical source. But yeah, sure. The hero's journey there, which was developed by Joseph Campbell, which is why we say Campbellian, because we're referring to his development of this notion, which is really just a way of breaking down stories or more specifically, I think what Campbell did actually was he went through a lot of historical, folk tales,
Yeah.
and he found that they followed certain pretty pretty repeatable patterns across a large number of tales across a wide swath of cultures, with specific kind of signposts, which are the things that we sometimes say, like refusal of the call is one that happens in like every superhero movie, for one thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I mean, Campbell, I think, was most interested in psychology. Like, if you actually read A Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is one of the books he wrote on this whole thing, like it contains a lot of psychology, and just to say it here, a lot of dated psychology. There's a lot of Freudian concepts in this book, but he's very much interested in people, and you're right that his view on culture and people was to take every great myth and story from across time and see if there is some commonality, outside of cultural influences, just innate human qualities of how we tell certain stories. And then he created the monomyth. And just to say here, Hollywood and people in general have taken like the hero's journey and the monomyth and even, a 3-act structure, which is kind of part of what Campbell developed in the hero's journey here, and said, this is the way it should be. And that's not what Campbell was doing. He was never like saying, this is what makes a good story, that like the hero's journey is what makes a good story. He was just saying, hey, I looked at like 20 books and they all do this thing. Isn't that weird that like there's something innate to human psychology that we want to tell stories specifically like this? And that's cool. Let's talk about that for a bit. And that's really all it is. And obviously, people were very fascinated with this thing, and a lot of creators have taken the concept of the hero's journey and intentionally put it into their stories. I think the example we always go back to is Star Wars, right? I think Star Wars is the most clear, biggest pop culture example of George Lucas was very intentionally channeling the hero's journey. If you look at that movie, it hits beat by beat, point by point, every one of our big, broad acts of the hero's journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason we're specifically mentioning this here is that this section is called, part 2 is called The Road of Trials. Mm-hmm. And the Road of Trials is literally step 6 on the 17-step hero's journey Campbellian list of beats, basically.
Yep. So you cross the threshold into the new world. That's not always literal, but it is here. And once you cross that threshold, you undergo a series of trials and quests and struggles. And there will be a lot of different things going on there. I don't know how much we want to go into this because I don't want to like spoil the book for people. But and it's not to say that the Talisman like very closely adheres to this, but there's definitely a lot going on here that is similar to Campbell's 17 steps.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing is something like The Road of Trials is intentionally extremely vague. Mm-hmm. Like all that's really implied there is a sense of travel and difficulty.
Yep.
And you can even say that the travel part is metaphorical and that all that is really implied is the hero has struggles, and it's like, okay, that's just a story. So
well, I mean, that's the thing that at the end of the day, the thing is, if you generalize story enough, then it's all going to be the same, right? Like if you get to its broad thing, it's character, conflict, resolution.
Right.
Oh wow, we all tell the same kinds of stories. It's like
every story has 3 acts: a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Exactly. And that's not to demean what Campbell did. I think that book is worth a read if you are at all interested in story. A Hero with a Thousand Faces. Again, it has some very dated understanding of human psyche that I think psychologists have now a better understanding of how the brain works and why we do certain things. So it has a lot of references and assumptions that these psychological understandings of humans is fact when it wasn't. But it is really interesting. Like, it's just he'll point out something in the monomyth, and then he'll and here's 50 examples from cultures, cross time, cross globe, and it's really fascinating to read.
Sure. Yeah. I have not actually read it, honestly, but I have read in detail about it. So I need to rectify that, though.
Yeah, I was that same way a couple years ago, and I said, I keep talking about this thing. I really need to just read it, and so I did.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Sure. All right. So let's begin the road of trials. Matt, the first chapter that we're covering this week is chapter 6, The Queen's Pavilion. And this chapter starts off right where we left off last week with Jack Sawyer opening his eyes in a new world. He's crossed that first threshold, as Campbell would say, and he's ready to begin his trials. Last week we talked about how the early parts of the book built up the territories as a place that was just, better, fresher air, stronger smells. Like it was just better. And this week, initially is no different as Jack, opens his eyes, takes in the territories, and then his reaction to it is upright. He no longer felt ill. He felt, in fact, better than at any time since leaving Los Angeles. No, not merely healthy, but somehow harmonious, mysteriously in tune with his body. The warm, drifting air of the territories patted his face with the gentlest, most fragrant of touches, its own delicate and flowery scent quite distinct beneath the stronger odor of raw meat it carried. Now, Matt, part of this good feeling is surely like, him, just this good feeling of doing what you're supposed to be doing, like an Unbreakable, my favorite movie. And then, or just, this feeling of he's finally taking some initiative and trying to solve a problem that's been stressing him out for months. But I also have this feeling that Jack sees this adventure as a kind of escape from, the dreary New Hampshire seaside town into this world of adventure. But the thing we'll learn about the territories is that it might smell nicer. It might feel more alive, but it's also, it's not a great place either. It's not like, this is not like the perfect utopia world.
Right. I'm going to carry over the point that I sort of made at the end of last week's discussion about the smell of raw meat, this powerful pervading smell of raw meat as like a warning sign, because, I don't think everything is meant to be better, although maybe Jack feels that way. Everything is more, I think, meant to be extreme or more exaggerated than our world. Because I don't really find the smell of raw meat to be good, personally. And then also the connotations of raw meat is like violence, death, butchery.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And the fact that, especially in this moment, like he's smelling this fragrant, gentle, flowery smell, and underneath it is the raw meat. And so you get this idea that on first glance, you look at the territories and it is this place where the air feels cleaner, better, but there is something underneath, something rotten underneath. And not even rotten, because the meat is not rotten. It's just raw, but death and the potential for rot. Yeah,
I like that.
So we see here that Jack's clothes have magically changed, which I bring up here only to show that there is a difference between traveling through doors like we've seen in the Dark Tower and the ways we've seen characters transfer through worlds in the Dark Tower, and what Jack calls flipping over here in the Talisman. This isn't the same. There's some real specific magic going on here.
Yeah. This is more Soul Reaver. What's the reference here? I don't know.
What is it? What?
That was one of those video games a long time ago where you could like move between one world and the other to take advantage of combat mechanics.
Oh, see, I was thinking you said Soul Reaver, and my head immediately went to Soul Calibur, and I was like, what does this have to do with a fighting game?
Well, Soul Calibur was also what was on the tip of my tongue, but no, it's Soul Reaver.
Okay, I've not played that.
But basically, it's not what we're used to. And I mean, I'm just going to chalk this up once again to like, hadn't really figured out how he wanted this to go. But also, you could just say Jack's just special. Jack's not, he's not limited in the same ways as other people who have dealings with Midworld. He just has this ability innate to himself.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right. And this is, we don't know how Speedy's drink works, and we don't, you said it last week, but we get this idea that eventually the more he does this, he'll be able to do it on his own without the aid of the drink eventually, right? Like that's kind of what the book hints at, or gestures.
That was my feeling.
Yeah. And so this is something beyond, like, it's just different. And I mean, we see here that it is transformative, not just in clothes. We'll see the guitar pick that he brings over looks like a tooth. The coin that he gets here in the territories brought back, it transforms into a different kind of coin. So there is some transformative magic going on here for sure. And it is different. We haven't seen this in any of our, Dark Tower adjacent stuff so far.
Right. Yeah.
So Jack looks around and sees a large pavilion tent where the Alhambra Inn was in his world, but there are guards there stopping him from getting in, and Jack is unsure of what to do next, and still he sees the captain of the guards, the man with the scar, the man he was told to look out for and talk to. Jack is able to get his attention and shows him the guitar pick, and speaking of turning into a tooth, we get this scene here. When he displayed it in his palm, he felt shock boom through him. What he held in his hand was not a finger pick, but a long tooth. A shark's tooth, perhaps, inlaid with a winding, intricate pattern of gold. When Jack looked up to the captain's face, half expecting a blow, he saw his shock echoed there. The impatience which had seemed so characteristic had utterly vanished. Uncertainty and even fear momentarily distorted the man's strong features. We don't learn the significance of the guitar pick / shark's tooth here, Matt, but I thought it would be worth talking about how Farron, the captain of the guard, reacts to it, because he has this very specific reaction. And there is this very specific mood that Farron creates throughout his time here in the book that we don't really get direct answers for, but it is interesting to talk about.
Yeah, sure. I think that it comes up in a few places where he knows something that we don't know. You know, he has some subtext about where Jack is coming from, what his mission is, that he's not supposed to talk about, doesn't or, isn't supposed to let Jack know that he knows about this. So something along those lines. I did want to say that I think this is probably a dragon tooth because it's Midworld.
That's fun.
And my other comment on Farron is that the voice that Muller uses for Farron is extremely close to his Roland voice. And I really love it because it's like I get to hang out with Roland for a little while again.
Oh, that's so fun. He's a different man than Roland for sure, though.
Yeah. That's the thing, is it's not exactly his Roland voice. It's just, a man only has so many things he can do with his voice. So it's in kind of the same gravelly register.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not like, to be clear, it's not like I decided it's not like I saw him as Roland. But it was I don't know. It was pleasant. It was pleasant.
Yeah, no, I get it. So, I mean, I think this is really interesting, to talk about economy of storytelling here. This is a very long book, but I kind of love that we don't have to waste time here. Like, and I'm not saying we'll never learn what it is about this tooth that affects Farron. So I think we probably will at some point. That seems like it would be an obvious thing. But that both King and Straub recognize here that, like, doing this big long backstory about, if there's a prophecy related to this tooth or related to this guy coming to the territories, that, like, we don't need to know that right now. Like, we get everything we need through Farron's reaction to this thing, and we don't actually need to know the long, complicated backstory. We don't have to halt the plot here to learn the complicated backstory of this world and these people and what they're waiting for or not waiting for. It would bog down the chapter, and they both kind of realize that, and we just rely on the fact that you understand that there's some deep meaning here from the way they point out Farron's reactions to both it and Jack throughout this chapter.
Yeah, I was going to say prophecy too. Like, I got the feeling that Farron is recognizing things as being related to prophecy.
Yeah.
But he's, and some of his reactions are like not wanting to screw up what he sees as prophecy unfolding.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll see maybe, but I do like that. The recognition that, hey, we don't need this here. I think a lot of fantasy stories make that mistake where, like, oh, so he's going to react. Oh, let me pause the book and tell you about the prophecy if there's a prophecy.
Yeah, right. I agree that prophecies, much like dreams, are usually very uninteresting.
Yeah, they're different crutches. Like, it's just so you can, like, writing is about conveying information a lot of the times, right? And sometimes, especially when you're creating a whole new world for your characters to exist in, there's this real temptation to release every little bit of information you have about this world. And it's a very difficult line to walk of how much to give without totally confusing your people, but without completely bogging down your story in that exposition. And I mean, we don't know anything about the territories really. Like we know there's a queen, but like to really get into it, we don't understand how any of the power structures work here, right? Like we know there's a guy named Morgan, and he's got his men mixed in with the queen's men around here, and there's obviously a power struggle there, but like, is she like the literal government ruler of the territories? Like literally? We're not even clear on that.
And what is she the queen of? Like, is she the queen of the territories, or is she the queen of like that area?
This pavilion? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we just don't know. And importantly, I don't really think we need to know at this point in the story.
No, I agree. It's not, that's not what we care about at this point.
So we learn here that Farron doesn't know a Parker, but he does know a Parkus, who we can assume is the territory's twinner of Speedy Parker. And Jack's description of him is like close enough. Like it's not exactly the same, but it's like close enough. And we'll see this beat again when Jack gets his first glimpse of the queen, that she does look like Jack's mother, but still different and distinct. So they're not literal twins.
Yeah, that was interesting.
They're twinners.
That was kind of interesting to me, because I was like, this is already a ridiculous magic fantasy world. Why not just make them literal, like, carbon copy twins, identical, twins? And they're not going that way. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we don't really know what to do with that yet, but yeah.
I mean, I guess if I have to think of a practical reason, like a storytelling reason why you would do that, it would mean that people can't just like replace their twinners, because people would be like, you're obviously not the same person.
Yeah. And it does, convey information to the reader that these are distinct people. Like they're similar. They might have similar character traits, but they're distinct people.
Right. Yeah.
So Farron agrees to help Jack see the queen, but to do so, he must pretend to be the bastard child of the captain of the guard, because his men are everywhere. And then I love the change here, because like, we immediately realize, oh wait, this place is dangerous. There's some power struggle stuff going on here.
Yeah, it was interesting because it seemed like this wonderful Renaissance festival ambiance of just like, he's gonna have a great time at this festival, I guess. And then it's like very suddenly it's like danger. If people knew what his errand was, they'd probably try to kill him. Like very quick escalation.
Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about this real quick. This is a line from Farron. Those were his men, he whispered. What life will be like when... He shook his head and for a moment seemed to forget his haste. It says in the book of good farming that the meek shall inherit the earth, but those fellows don't have a teaspoon of meekness among them. Taking's all they're good for. They say they want wealth. They want... He glanced upward, unwilling and unable to say what else the men outside wanted. So that's ominous. But let's talk about the book of good farming and its leader, Jason Christ.
Oh man. So if we're going to continue to pretend this is just Midworld, or at least this is on the way to being Midworld, I think this is a fun window into the kind of syncretic Midworldian Christian religion that is developed from bits and pieces of stuff from our world. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely like the meek shall inherit the earth is a line straight from the Bible, right? So it is definitely Bible adjacent. Just like you're right, Christianity in Midworld and the Dark Tower was Earth Christianity adjacent. But this is I just love the detail. Like to call it the Book of Good Farming is just so fascinating.
Yeah,
because it is not the same. It definitely isn't. That's a pretty key difference here.
One funny thing about Jason Christ is like it's specifically not the man Jason, it's the man Jesus. You almost, I mean, so in my head, Midworld is a big ring around the Dark Tower. And like if you're really and like it's enormous too, so like if you're just really far away from Gilead, it's entirely possible that you just have a different flavor of this pseudo Christianity, because like maybe you got the front half of the Bible and then the other guy's got the back half of the Bible, because Roland doesn't know certain biblical things but he knows other biblical things, so I don't know, you just imagine that like as long as we're striving for some kind of coherency, even though in reality I think that Stephen King just changed his mind over time, you could just say this is like far away from Gilead. This is like on the other side of the world, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also have to reckon with the idea that at least in this area that we're calling the territories, whether it is Midworld or not, there is a lot of bleed through from our world. We know of two characters that have done it, right? We know of Jack's father and Morgan doing so. Like, you know, you could see a version where someone comes in, wants to set up an agricultural center here, and like feeds them bits and pieces of the Bible in order to get them to behave, but calls it the Book of Good Farming because they, you know, I want you to be good. I want you to be good farmers.
I love that
kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the idea that like the Bible has been used as a weapon over time in different parts of Midworld. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I mean, it's been used as a weapon in different parts of our world, so why not, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah. So Farron leads Jack to a small crawl space with a peephole that is basically just the eyes of the dragon all over again. And from there, he gets a good look at the queen. You know, when the book said that Jack needed to see the queen, I kind of thought they meant like have an audience with, not just like literally look at her. But I will say that this glimpse of the queen does allow him to understand the full depth of his quest and the stakes here, right? Because he sees the queen, who at first looks exactly like his mother to his eyes, and then he quickly sees the differences in her face. But it is the one thing is very clear is that she is dying. No bones about it, right? She's dying, and this confirms what he kind of already knew, but it's impossible to ignore when it's right here in front of you.
Yeah, it was funny. It caught me off guard that he was literally just seeing her. I figured there would be a scene and an interaction. She would, you know, clarify what he needed to do, you know, tell him what his quest was. But no, it's just the sheer sort of certainty that like, oh, okay, this is real. You know, she's really dying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you're right. I mean, like even this is almost anti-Campbellian because you don't think Farron is going to be like the supernatural being that meets him on the other side of the threshold here. You think the queen would be the perfect person for, like, there's literally a step in Campbell's thing of the meeting with the goddess, which could have just been the queen here, but no, that's not what we're doing.
Or maybe that was, you know, you saw the goddess.
She saw her. Yeah. I don't know. To get back to what we were talking about with Farron and the Book of Good Farming more here, I want to talk about this part a little bit. A muscle just below the eye on the unscarred cheekbone jumped like a fish. He was pressing his hands together, palm to palm. And your directions, your orders, whatever, are to go west. Is that correct? Jack could practically feel the man vibrating, controlling his growing agitation only from a lifetime's habit of self-discipline. That's right, he said. I'm supposed to go west, isn't that right? Shouldn't I go west to the other Alhambra? So, I mean, there's a lot going on here, right? Like, this is a man, you know, we've already kind of learned, he quotes the Book of Good Farming multiple times. He said, for Jason's sake, which we're assuming is the Jesus version of that book. We don't actually know, but he's obviously a religious person. He's a religious man. Religion plays an important role in his mind. And we don't know this, but you kind of make the assumption here that there is a religious event happening here to him. It's kind of like if you were like super into the prophecy of Jesus, and then this guy shows up and he's Jesus. Like, imagine what it would be like to have read these prophecies as a Jewish person. And then like, here's this guy saying that prophecy, that's me. That's me. You're like, oh my God. But then this kid is like totally unsure of himself. So like the prophecy is this person's going to come and save the day. And this kid going, yeah, I think I'm west, right? The west. And you're just kind of like, this is the one.
Right. It is interesting that as we continue to watch his behavior, because it's almost like he's unsure, you know. He's like, well, I'm getting all these signs, but man, this is just like a kid, you know. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely aware that he's standing next to Ka or prophecy or whatever, and he doesn't want to fuck it up.
And I love that the book doesn't actually, like, this is all subtext. Like, the book doesn't come out and say any of this. It's just the way Farron is behaving, the looks he's giving. I think there is one like throwaway reference to like he's having a religious experience that Jack assumes, but really the rest of this is all subtext that we're adding to it. But I think it has to be, right. It is what makes the most sense.
Yeah, right. I mean, as you say, it would be boring if we just said it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I think the subtext is there though.
yeah. So we begin our next chapter, chapter 7, appropriately titled Farron, and this begins with Jack freaking out about the presence of Morgan Sloat in the territories. He's here, and he's coming. He's coming to this pavilion as we speak. And this is interesting, though, because Jack attempts to describe Morgan using, quote, his innate gift for mimicry, which is the first time we're learning about this, employing the innate gift for mimicry he always had, a gift which made his own father roar with laughter even when he was tired and feeling down, Jack did Morgan Sloat. Age fell into his face as he laddered his brow the way Uncle Morgan's brow laddered into lines when he was pissed off about something. At the same time, Jack sucked it in his cheeks and pulled his head down to create a double chin. His lips flared out in a fishy pout, and he began to waggle his eyebrows rapidly up and down. Does he go like that? So what do you think of his innate gift of mimicry here, that we've given him this talent?
I mean, this is a great thing to do storytelling wise. Like, it's always fun to give your character at least one fun and useful talent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jack having a talent which is basically acting works extremely well given the story that we're in. I mean, number one, his mom is this famous actor, so it just makes sense plot wise. But also, I think having your talent be acting just allows more interesting situations to happen. Because it's sort of like, I mean, honestly, it reminds me of Dungeons and Dragons, where or any tabletop role playing game, where like the most fun you can have doing Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role playing games is always to like cleverly sort of act your way through a situation and out the other side. The most boring way is always just to get into a fight. Which is why it's kind of interesting that Roland's one talent was shooting people really well, which I see as a very intentional choice of being like he's almost like a intentionally poor fit for a protagonist, because he's super good at violence and almost nothing else. But anyway, back to this story. I think it's very fun. I think it's going to give us a lot of fun situations because he'll basically have to like cleverness and act his way out of jams that he gets in.
Yeah, I mean, we see it here, when he's having to pretend to be the bastard son of Farron, right? And then we also see it in the following chapters where he has to, tell this story and put on this act of this kid traveling across the country for specific reasons related to his mother, and like he has to come up with these things. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it is a talent that he's employing again and again.
Yep.
But the interesting thing here, Matt, is that the Morgan Farron is referring to isn't like Morgan Sloat at all. He's not short and fat. He's tall and lanky. We saw that, assumed that Parker and Parkus both look similar. We saw that the Queen is different looking than Jack's mother, but similar to her. But this seems odd, right? Like these two people are not the same looking in the slightest.
Yeah, it's like he's like a spiritual twinner, maybe, or maybe there's something much different going on, and they're not twinners at all. They're just in league somehow.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a mystery here for sure.
Yeah. We also learn that the Queen of the Territories did indeed have a son, but that son died as an infant, something that we are told here almost happened to Jack. He saw Uncle Morgan glancing furtively back at the bright square of the door to the living room, his balding brow turning to ladder rungs, his lips pursing like the chilly mouth of a lake bass. He saw Uncle Morgan take a throw pillow from a nearby chair, saw him put it gently yet firmly over the sleeping baby's entire head, holding it there with one hand while he held the other hand flat on the baby's back. And when all movement had stopped, he saw Uncle Morgan put the pillow back on the chair where Lily sat to nurse and go into the bathroom to urinate. So he sees here Morgan kill himself. Like he can imagine it in his mind's eye. And we've talked about this before, Matt, but this is one of those moments where a character doesn't actually know something happened this way, but thinks something happened this way. And our author basically just says, yeah, this is how it happened. Like it is possible that Jack is wrong here, that there's room for interpretation still, but I think the text is pretty cut and dry here that this is exactly what happened, that Morgan, as a baby, tried to murder Jack and almost succeeded. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, like, it's, again, talking about economy of storytelling, talking about not wasting time. We could play a song and dance about how, well, maybe that's not what happened. And the book is really just kind of unequivocal about this. Is like, the line here is, his heart told him it had been. The coincidence was too utterly perfect, too seamlessly complete. So, like, the book is not trying to introduce any doubt in your mind about this is the way things went down.
Yeah. I like this technique. You know, you could just tell me, hey, it's, you know, it's a magical vision, whatever.
Yeah.
I'll just accept it. But I think, you know, it makes too much sense given what we know. When your character says that his heart tells him that was it, then you're just like, yeah, sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this concept that, you know, we were told Jack did not have a twinner because he was special, and his specialness here seems to be he survived a death that he shouldn't have, perhaps.
Yeah.
And yet his twinner did not.
Well, I'm definitely spitballing here, but you imagine that maybe Morgan and Morgan, the captain's Morgan, you know, colluded, and their plan was like, okay, we're gonna kill Jack, because I mean, there's a kind of interesting symmetry going on, right? Because Jack on this side, or rather on Earth, is the heir to a fortune. Jack on the other side is the heir to a throne. They're mirrors in circumstance in certain ways.
Sure.
And both of the Morgans are the people who stand to gain the most if the kid is out of the way. He would gain, you know, more of the share of the company, more of the share of the kingdom. And so maybe both of them collude and say we both need to kill our respective Jacks. But then one of them fails, and the consequence is now that you have this wild card, this Jack, if you will. And now, just to kind of address the thing that I think I kind of left hanging there, I think that if they hadn't colluded, I think that, like, the worlds just kind of keep a mirror of each other. So, like, if something terrible happens in one world, then that thing is going to happen in the other world. Sure. Would be my theory here. And so by colluding, they messed up the symmetry, would be my guess
interesting.
Here.
Interesting. I like that.
This is one of my more ass-pulley theories, but
no, I like it.
Okay, good.
At the end of this interaction, Jack is kind of, you know, this is circling back to what we talked about before, but Jack is kind of just assessing Farron as a person. And I love this interaction right here. He changed, Jack thought. He changed twice. Once when Jack showed him the shark's tooth that had been a filigreed guitar pick in a world where delivery trucks instead of horse-drawn carts ran the roads. And he had changed again when Jack confirmed that he was going west. He had gone from threat to a willingness to help to what? I can't tell you what to do. To something like religious awe or religious terror.
Yeah.
So this is what I was mentioning earlier. This throwaway line towards religious something. I love this. I love this from multiple levels. I love this because it's really interesting examination of Farron and whatever religious motivation he has here that we're not party to. But I also love Jack's, you know, intuitive observation here, just his ability to notice this change in character.
Yeah. That's another thing we like about him is he's perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's interesting to do this specific thing with a character like Farron, who's otherwise a stoic badass, and just show that, like, whatever's going on is so beyond the pale that even he is going to have this strong emotional reaction to it.
Sure. And then there's this little interesting segment here, Matt, where Farron leads Jack out of the pavilion and he cuts through the kitchen, and the head chef of the kitchen sees them trying to cut through and gets, like, really pissed off at them and starts screaming at them. And then Farron, like, fucking breaks his wrist. And the book basically says he's basically killed this man because he has taken away his tools. He will not be able to cook anymore with a broken wrist. He's denied him his trade. And then, so he's fucked. So, like, this reaction that Farron has here to this man who was pissed off at them, but I never, every time I read this, I never see, like, actual physical harm intended from the chef himself. The most he does is kind of grab Jack a little bit to kind of push them out of the kitchen, but it seems like an extreme reaction, does it not?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of the many hints that this world actually sucks, and it's this dog eat dog place where you're kind of hanging on by the skin of your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, maybe Farron himself is only holding on to his position through a certain amount of ruthlessness. So
Yeah.
he has to behave this way to kind of keep his position.
There is, I mean, his reaction, his physical reaction does come the moment the chef lays a hand on Jack, which you know, if we're going back to our religious thing, you know, that act that could have, you could say, activated something in Farron, like that he has to defend this kid. Which I think, to jump ahead a little bit, I think this is great if we establish this really hardcore defensive nature around Jack, that this man touches Jack and he gets his arm broken for it, because then it directly contrasts with Osmond whipping the shit out of Jack's back, you know, and Farron does nothing. And so we see here this man that is willing to break someone's hand for merely touching a person is completely cowed by this guy, and it shows immediately what Farron's, you know, place on the totem pole is here.
Yeah. And just how powerful Osmond is, where it's like,
Yeah.
if Farron had stood up to him, then it's like, well, that just wouldn't have worked. Like, Farron would not have succeeded.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Speaking of Osmond, just when it looks like they're about to escape the tent, Farron and Jack are stopped by Osmond. We learn here that he is basically Morgan's second in command in the territories, and he is described here as skeletal. I love that, the skeletal Osmond. And he's just kind of a deliciously fun villain, I think. What do you think of Osmond?
I love Osmond. He's a great sort of weird, uncomfortable evil.
Yeah.
Because the thing that's scary about him is that he's so used to being able to do whatever he wants and hurt whoever he wants that he basically has no filters of any kind anymore. And that makes him disconcerting. There's nothing more disconcerting in real life than encountering somebody who just like doesn't seem to feel the need to keep their behaviors within the lines. You know, if you've ever like been on a public bus and had somebody just like pacing around and getting in people's faces or whatever, it's like this is the kind of person who kind of makes your hackles stand up, which in certain ways he reminds me of a sort of Walter O'Dim-esque character, where he's
interesting.
But not a lot though. Only in the specific way where he can just kind of say whatever he wants, and people will just be like, yes sir, you know.
And he does kind of delight in getting to say whatever he wants and getting to pressure people. You know, I think his dialogue is a lot of fun in the way he just like knows that he's making people terrified and enjoys speaking directly to them anyway.
Yeah. I think you're right.
We do learn that Osmond was one of the men who tried to kidnap Jack that day back in California. And therefore he surely recognizes Jack here, right? And knows this whole bastard child thing is a charade. But we don't know for sure, because in the end he lets them go. But I love this whole scene so much. I love how deliciously evil Osmond is, like we talked about. And I especially love this recurring beat here, how King and Straub describe the whip cracks of the whip that Osmond is using. Because when he first hears the whip, he describes it as the pop of a Daisy air rifle, right? He says like it's a toy gun, basically an air gun. But then Osmond uses the whip on Jack, and we see here the whip came down again, not the mild cough of a Daisy air rifle this time, but the loud, clean report of a .22. And Jack had time to think, I know where that's going, and then a large fiery hand clawed into his back. But the reason this is interesting is because then the whip switches back to hitting someone else. This time it's the carter that's responsible for the big beer spill that we're going to get to in a minute, but it's back to sounding like the crack of an air rifle again. Like it's really interesting how the way Jack describes the whip sounding like a gun changes in different ways. Changes, you know, when he first hears it to when it's being used on him to when he hears it used on the carter the first time. But then when he's walking away and seeing the carter get brutalized by this, it's back to being a carabine again, a gun again.
Yeah, it's interesting that I don't know exactly what to make of it. It could just be that I think in the moment my interpretation was that he's Osmond is hitting harder when it's whipping louder, basically. And so like he actually wants to hurt Jack. He actually wants to injure Jack beyond just causing him pain, which is interesting because that led me on this kind of tangent while I was reading, because I was like, I thought getting whipped by some, especially if the whip is explicitly said to be moving faster than the speed of sound, because that's what the crack is. I thought that would cause some more severe injuries than whatever it is that Jack suffers here, because he seems to be kind of over it pretty quickly.
Yeah, we don't see him like tending his back wounds or having someone else tend his wound.
Yeah,
like
he doesn't seem to even have wounds. It's just like it hurt him, and then he walked away.
Mm-hmm.
So, I try to avoid insinuating that authors have made mistakes. So, like, maybe he was somehow protected from harm, but also maybe the authors don't understand what a whip does to a person. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. Yeah, and I think the literal interpretation is you are absolutely correct that the whip changes from a toy rifle to a real rifle. The harder Osmond uses it. But I do think it's, from the perspective of this being a kid who perhaps thought that this adventure was going to be a little bit more fun than it is, that this world was going to be a little bit more of a, fun adventure world, like going from hearing this as basically a child's toy to, oh wait, no, this is real. That's a gun sound. Oh no. And then, he leaves it with feeling like it's, I mean, what happens to this poor Carter is monstrous, right? Like I didn't pull the actual line here, but they walk away as Osmond is beating this man to death and laughing about it. And suddenly it's all gun. I don't think he'll ever describe a whip as an air rifle again.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the idea of, childhood versus adulthood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing with the Carter is like, yeah, like this is horrifying. Like he's probably basically like in shock because his son just died.
Yeah.
And now he's going to be beat to death. Like this is very horrible.
It is. Speaking of that, yeah, we learn that Jack is kind of saved by the bell here, saved from more questioning or being discovered by the timely spilling of some ale. We hear this Carter took a turn too hard and spilt a bunch of the Kingsland ale, the finest ale in the territories, all over the ground. And it happens to also be the direction that Morgan is coming from. So they need to clean it up, and they need to clean it up quickly. And for that, Osmond turns to our captain of the guard, Farron. And I don't have anything other to say here other than I love Osmond's dialogue sometimes. Like, have you followed the events of the last 5 minutes? Yes, Osmond. Have you followed them closely? Have you gleaned them? Have you gleaned them most closely? It's just delicious and evil. Yeah. I just love the way this guy talks.
Yeah, I do too. He's the territory's version of a bad guy because he's ostentatious and larger than life.
Yeah. So Osmond sends Farron out to deal with the ale, and Jack goes with him. And as they're walking out, as they're preparing to go, there's this interesting part that I think is worth talking about here, because Jack is like looking out and he sees a young woman with a dirty baby at one huge breast who told him she could teach him something to do with his little man besides let piss out of it if he had a coin or two. Jack looked away uncomfortably, his face hot. So this is, I mean, just a incredibly off-putting situation, right? Like she's breastfeeding a child while propositioning a 12-year-old boy to teach him how sex works, right? It's just incredibly uncomfortable, especially a little kid. And I think this is part of the table setting that is happening here with what this place is. It is not this like place of magic, fairy tale, like wonderland. It is not that. It is something else. And it's not saying there aren't good things here, but there are also things like this.
Yeah, I mean, most of our time in the territories is terrifying, actually, and brutal.
Yeah. So Farron sets a brutal pace, and they eventually get to the site of the crash. It's clear like a bunch of the locals have been enjoying all the free beer, and everyone's kind of drunk and indignant and wasted. And I love this part here. He saw a laughing man lead a laughing boy of perhaps 8 by the hand. The man bore a nightmarish resemblance to the hateful desk clerk at the Alhambra, and Jack understood with perfect clarity that this was that man's twinner. Both he and the boy he led by hand were drunk. So that's, again, another fun detail and another thing reinforcing that twinners should look the same, right? Or similar enough to be recognized.
Yeah. I think you're right there. There's a weird kind of macabre horribleness to this whole tableau rather of the wagon. Like every part of it is perfectly horrible because like there's a dead boy lying there, horribly mangled beside a bunch of dead horses.
Yeah, no one's covered his face.
Yeah. just like moved him out of the way. Basically, everything stinks of warm beer. People have been drinking this warm beer because it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, like in a fantasy setting, sometimes you don't notice that things are fucked up. But I mean, like, think about what kind of turn your life must have taken if you see an overturned truck of Shinerbach on the road and the driver's laying dead on the road. And you're like, well, best not let this Shiner go to waste.
Yeah.
And you just get really drunk and then you wander off. Like,
and then you just wander home. Well, that was good day. Good day.
Yeah. Wow. This is the best thing that's happened to me in recent memory.
Yeah.
Like, so it speaks to how badly these people are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. All is not right in the territories. Yeah. For sure. I think the best detail of this whole thing is that the pockets of the kids' pants have been turned out. Right. So like, not only have these people just left this body sitting here, not covering it, not forming any kind of basic human decency, but someone robbed him too. Like, it's just this place sucks.
Yeah.
And right. I mean, our world sucks too a lot, right? Like there's a lot of terrible people in our world, but like all the specific targeted references to how much this place really, really sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So to get people to clear out and go away, Farron draws his sword. And I love this bit too. Like this just reinforces what we've been talking about. He's not this heroic captain of the guard with this beautiful long sword. We see here that it was short and businesslike as Jack had imagined, the very antithesis of a sword in a romance. It was little more than a long butcher's knife, pitted and nicked and scarred, the handle wrapped in old leather that had been sweated dark. Like the antithesis of a sword in a romance, like this, there's nothing magical about this place, despite the fact that it was magic that got him here.
Yeah. It's not, the territories aren't better. They're just more extreme.
Yeah. So the crowd backs down to Farron, fortunately, and he sends Jack on his way to the west. And suddenly it's all real to Jack, the danger, the loneliness. And I love this line, fear and loneliness combined into the sharpest, most disheartening wave of unhappiness he had ever known. So it's like suddenly it's real, right? Like you crossed the threshold, you went into the territories, you met some people, you got a friend, maybe a father figure in Farron here, but suddenly you got to go and you're going by yourself. And he's terrified. He's absolutely terrified.
Yeah. That's kind of a recurring beat throughout these chapters is some amount of adventure, some amount of cleverness and bravery. And then he'll be hit by just like terrible sadness and desolation because he's reminded again, like, I'm alone and that sucks.
Yeah, definitely. So Farron gives Jack another token. So he has the guitar pick / tooth, and now this time he has a silver coin. We see here in the territories it is a coin with the queen's face on it. And we're again not told what this trinket can or will do, right? Like I think Farron says something about like you'll know when is the right time to use it, but that's it, which is very, very like Hero's Journey, very myth. Like here's this magical token and you'll know when you need this token. I think everyone listening to this has read at least 5 stories that have done that same thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So Jack sets out on his own, walking alone on this road and diving into the forest on each side every time he hears a wagon coming, worried that it's going to be Morgan with his giant scary wagon. And the trees, Matt, the trees. This time you don't even have to make a Lord of the Rings reference here because Jack and Peter Straub and Stephen King make it for you. Jack sees the trees and thinks of them as Ents and Entwives, bad Ents and Entwives. The trees are alive and they're moving and they're terrifying.
Yeah, I fucking love this. Could really feel the claustrophobia of the trees.
Yeah.
It's just a great set piece.
Yeah, and he's told here that Morgan could possibly sense him, that it's to smell him, I think is what Farron says. He'll be able to smell you out. He can smell trouble. And so there's this real fear he has here.
Yeah, that makes it even worse for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so like we've set up this perfect scenario here, right? Where he's on the road, he's walking, and then he hears Morgan's carriage. And now he has to choose between staying on the road and diving into the spooky forest. And he, of course, dives into the spooky forest. But I love that we're presented with this choice. Like it's danger on the road, danger on the sides of the road. There's danger all around him, and now he has to choose between 2 bad options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love, Matt, speaking of writing, the description of the carriage here, I think is just fantastic. The moment of its passage was brief, no more than a second, perhaps less than that, but Jack's recall of it was total. The diligence was a gigantic vehicle, surely a dozen feet high. The trunks and bundles lashed with stout cord to the top added another 3 feet. Each horse in the team which pulled it wore a black plume on its head. These plumes were blown back amongst flat in a speed-generated wind. Jack thought later that Morgan must need a new team for every run because these looked close to the end of their endurance. Foam and blood sprayed back from their working mouths and curds. Their eyes rolled crazily, showing arcs of white. Like, this is a huge carriage. I think they said it's pulled by 13 horses, right?
Yeah.
I think it said a dozen plus a lead.
Yeah.
13 horses. It's a dozen feet high with 3 more loaded down. It's massive and it's going full tilt. It's just terrifying.
Yeah, right. It's interesting how King is able to make a horse-drawn carriage seem like a horror thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really love it. Just the whole vibe of this section.
Yeah.
In the dark woods with the. I mean, it's more than a little bit Lord of the Rings too, because we've got the element of running away from. He's not a rider, but there's horses involved anyway.
Sure.
Hiding on the side of the road while the Nazgul looks for the hobbits.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the element of the forest is not looking out for you.
Nope. So despite the warning in his heart, Jack must jump into the forest, and he does so. And just like in Tolkien, the forest attacks him. I love this scene, Matt. This is a really frantic scene where Jack is struggling to get the bottle of Speedy's magic potion before he's trapped and strangled to death. And, it just goes back and forth with him dropping the bottle and picking it up. And I think we see some of the liquid spills out of it. What would you think of the writing of this particular scene here?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've been enjoying the book so far, but this bit really elevated it to that level of like, oh, I get why people have been excited about this book.
Yeah.
We're really having some fun now.
Yeah, I mean, the tension of the scene. Like, this is, pure supposition. I don't actually know, but this feels like a King written scene. Like, I think King is so good with managing tension sometimes, and this just feels like it's got Stephen King written all over it.
Yeah, I agree.
So Jack successfully gets the potion and ends up back in our world. I'm curious what your reaction to this was. Did you think he was going to, flip to the territories and then kind of hang out there for most of the book, or did you think he'd be flipping back and forth like he does here?
I figured he'd be flipping a lot, actually, because why give him a bottle otherwise? Like,
sure,
if it were just going to be long stretches in one world or the other, then. Or rather, if he were just going to cross America in the other world, then I don't think he would have had a bottle, which is sort of has a natural use case. It's a very useful plot device, though, because it's naturally limited. It only has so many swigs in it.
Sure,
but
sure.
we also don't know how many it is. Like,
no.
You can't really judge that easily. So there's a limited, though unspecified, number of chances that he has to go back and forth.
It's just very vague, like how much a swig is and how much it takes to flip, right? Like, can you take a little sip? Is that enough, or does it have to get to fill your mouth? We just don't know. Yeah,
like what would happen if you didn't take enough? I mean,
yeah.
So and all that line of thought actually leads me to suspect that he doesn't even need the bottle. Like, I wouldn't at all be surprised if we learned that he never needed the bottle. He just flips whenever he drinks because that's what Speedy said would happen, and so it's the power of suggestion.
Sure.
The power to flip is within him. The bottle is just, the tools that he's using right now because he doesn't know how to control it.
Yeah, like Michael's magic stuff in Space Jam, right?
Totally, man, totally.
So Jack climbs out of the marsh he finds himself in on our world, and he starts looking for shelter. He eventually finds an old abandoned shed that he manages to crawl into, and there he sits alone and terrified. And we end the chapter on the most down note I can think of. I love this writing so much. Jack pulled it out and saw it was his toothbrush. At once, images of home and safety and rationality, all the things a toothbrush could represent, rose up and overwhelmed him. There was no way he could beat these emotions down or turn them aside this time. A toothbrush was a thing meant to be seen in a well-lighted bathroom, a thing to be used with cotton pajamas on the body and warm slippers on the feet. It was nothing to come upon in a bottom of your knapsack in a cold, dark tool shed on the edge of a gravel pit in a deserted rural town whose name you did not even know. I love this, Matt. And I think I've been thinking about this since we talked about the juicy fruit wrapper last week. But I think King really excels with this specific kind of specificity with objects. Like we joke about his use of brand names, and that is something he's done his entire career, and is something he is well known for. You know, it's to the point that people joke about it, that you are never drinking just a soda, you're drinking a Coke or a Pepsi in a King book. But he understands the importance of objects as tokens in you know, both literally, and that there's like a MacGuffin in this, but also figuratively. And like you're looking at a scene like this, and you're thinking, how am I going to write this? What is my way to convey his absolute hopelessness? And the idea of, well, what if he finds his toothbrush? Because what does a toothbrush mean to a kid that has just gone through what Jack has gone through today? And the ability to get that, and to grasp onto that, and to turn it into this image, it works so well. It's such a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it gives you something to visualize, because with, you know, you could have written this paragraph without the toothbrush at all. You could have just said he was overwhelmed with the absence of all of the creature comforts, blah blah blah, right? But the toothbrush anchors it in a visual image of the boy sitting there holding the toothbrush,
yeah,
as these emotions go over him. And I think that's really important to anchor things that way. Yeah,
the absurdity of seeing a dust devil in the sand with a gull's eye at the center, while a juicy fruit wrapper spins around it, just like the absurdity of sitting in a shed holding onto a toothbrush when you have no toothpaste or anything that, like, brushing your teeth right now is the last thing on your mind. And
yeah.
It's perfect. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, me too.
All right, moving on to chapter 8, titled The Oatly Tunnel. And here we pick up with Jack 6 days later, Matt. 6 days have gone by, and shockingly, it seems like he's doing okay. Straub and King choose to jump ahead of it here, and we see that Jack has remained in our world, but has made some progress on his journey. He's hitchhiking across the country. He's working odd jobs at places that will hire him. He's surviving. This is quite a different person from the end of the last chapter. We left him at this down moment of despair, and we pick up with him again. Well, he's doing okay. Well, why the jump, do you think? Why do we kind of, instead of seeing this transition to this person, we just kind of catch up with him after it?
Well, first of all, it was surprising that it happened, because I figured we would be following him pretty closely. But you know, I think that what it does is it starts to establish a pattern of time skips, where, you know, it subtly tells us this isn't a sprint, this is a marathon. This is going to take some time. It'll allow Jack to grow and develop in front of our eyes, as he has time to kind of believably react to and process and adapt to the challenges that he's facing. So, you know, we're basically seeing a Jack who, you know, he survived that night, and then he survived 6 more probably similar nights, and now he's just a little bit tougher and a little bit more prepared for what's ahead of him.
Yeah. No, I like that. So we see Jack successfully hitchhike to a town called Oatly. The man that picked him up mentions how dangerous it is to be hitchhiking, and I mean, this strikes me as something very 80s, Matt. I want to get your opinion on hitchhiking here, because if you look at a lot of King's early writing, it contains a whole lot of hitching in it, like a whole lot. Like, characters are hitchhiking constantly in Stephen King stories, and maybe this is just me being, you know, in my bubble, but do people hitchhike anymore? It feels like everyone just acknowledges how incredibly dangerous that would be, and no one does it. I can't remember the last time I've seen a hitchhiker. If ever. I don't know if I've ever seen someone hitchhiking on a road.
I feel like maybe I've seen one every few years.
Really?
I mean, I feel like I've seen a handful in my life, but I can't really recall when or where. It's just, I know that the answer is not 0. And I know this because I've like had to think to myself, like, you know, you're basically you're coming upon a person who is very far away from anywhere where they can rest safely, and you're like, well, shit, do I have an obligation to like help them? And then you're like, no, they're probably a murderer, and then you move on.
Yeah, I mean, like, would you ever pick up a hitchhiker ever?
I mean, practically speaking, probably not, because I'd always have some excuse that would sound really good at the moment.
Sure.
Like if I have my kids with me, I'm like, oh, I got my kids with me. Couldn't possibly, couldn't possibly pick up a hitchhiker, right?
I mean, I think like a 12-year-old boy would be like the closest to me thinking I could be safe picking up a hitchhiker.
I mean, if it were actually a kid, then you'd just call the police.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Yeah, like that's why you don't see that,
Yeah. But like, just like I can't. The type of person that would pick up a random person on the side of a highway and just be like, "Yep, get into my vehicle and sit next to me, very close to me for an hour. Yes, let's do this. This is great." It just strikes me as incredible. Like that's the thing is, it's dangerous on both sides. It's dangerous for the guy picking up the hitchhiker, and it's dangerous for the hitchhiker too. You just got two people that like, if they both mean well, it's perfectly safe. But then you have to be like, well, in 2022, what is the type of person that would pick up a hitchhiker, and what is the type of person that would be hitchhiking? Like the statistics here are bad.
I mean, well, ideally you get a sort of freeway situation, that movie that we watched the other day.
Sure.
Where both parties are murderers.
I like how you say the other day. It was over a year ago.
Yeah, it was, recently. It's interesting though, because like the whole dynamic is something that is like unheard of now, because he's a hitchhiker, and the guy who ends up picking him up this time is a traveling salesman.
Yeah,
which I'm not sure is even a job that exists anymore.
It might a little bit, but I don't know.
Not in the way that I think is being portrayed here. Yeah.
No, definitely not. No. Yeah. It's wild. I'm just trying to imagine. I mean, like, what happened? Like, what is it? Just because, like, why did? Because I feel like is this just like stories giving me a false representation of reality that like even 60 years ago everyone was kind of like hitchhiking? Yeah, no, that doesn't seem safe. Like, what has to happen for a society to go, hey, I think this is not safe anymore, and we should probably generally not do it? Like, I feel like we are much more risk averse than we were 60 years ago when it comes to stuff like this.
Well, okay, let me be more serious for a second. I don't actually think hitchhiking is objectively all that dangerous. It's just that nobody would pick you up. Like that's the reason why you don't do it. And the reason nobody would pick you up
because they think you're going to murder them.
Because they think you're going to murder them, and that's because of the news making us think that everybody's going to murder us all the time.
Yeah, this goes back to I might have talked about this on the show before, but like I just remember having a conversation with a friend and us talking about like the idea of, do people feel more safe today than they felt 40 years ago? And like at the time when I was the conversation, I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. And he was like, absolutely not. No, people are more scared today than they've ever been. And I disagree with him at the time. And now I start to think is like, no, I actually think we're just constantly terrified. Yeah. I think like knowledge is great and information is wonderful, but it terrifies you. Like there's a real truth to the idea that ignorance is bliss, that like people just didn't know statistics on this kind of stuff, and so they didn't think about it all the time.
And I mean, like knowing statistics is also like should that even matter? Like, yeah, like sometimes I find that I have left my front door unlocked for like 24 hours or longer or whatever. And I'm like, and whenever that happens, I'm like, do I even bother locking it? Like is somebody gonna come and try my door and then rob me? Like, is that a thing that could even conceivably happen? I mean, conceivably, yes. Statistically, almost certainly not. Yeah. So, but then I lock it.
Yeah, you're totally right, because the idea is like this was back in the good old days when people could leave their doors unlocked and not have to worry about it. And like, I mean, today you could leave your door unlocked and not have to worry about it. And you're probably right that 95% of the time, depending on where you live, you'd be totally fine. Yeah. You'd be 100% fine.
Yeah. So anyway, people have a bad estimation of their level of risk.
So yeah, I think you're right. It's not necessarily even the statistics, because I think you're right. Statistics probably show that not that many people are murdered by hitchhikers, but there's news and a combination of pop culture of reinforcing this idea that like, no, literally anyone that is hitchhiking on the road is probably a serial killer and is going to murder you immediately.
And Emily, like, I think like every movie that involves hitchhiking is like,
yes.
yeah, and then either the hitchhiker or the person who picks them up is a murderer. So.
Well, yeah, and that's one of those things where the idea of storytelling gets you in trouble, because like obviously that's going to happen, or you wouldn't have a movie where someone hitchhiking, because there needs to be conflict. If the movie is just and they got a ride to right. and then they got there and everything was fine, it's like okay, well, cool story.
I mean, hitchhiking is also a naturally dramatic situation, because you have strangers who are meeting under a sort of like a negotiated pretense of, you know, it's just a very interesting and intrinsically dramatic situation.
Yeah. But all that being said, this hitchhiker seems pretty normal. He doesn't do anything to Jack at all. Although, like, he is a little weird, right? Like, I think, like, picking someone up and then being like, you're glad I picked you up because I could be one of those people that, you know, rapes and murders children. So, like, why would you put that in someone's head when they get in your car? Yeah.
I mean, maybe, I don't know. Honestly, it seems kind of realistic to me that everybody who picks up a hitchhiker is like, oh man, it's a good thing you got me and not one of these other freaks. And but yeah, I don't know.
So he just picks him up and drops him off. I love the details we see here when he's talking to the man who picked him up, though, because we see that Jack has prepared, you know, story number 1 and story number 2 to get through his journey relatively unbothered. He's got a plan for what to say to people when they ask him why he, a 12-year-old boy, is out here hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere. And I think like this goes back to what you were talking about before about the performance, but I love that Jack understands here that like detail is important to a story like this, so he peppers in a ton of detail into both these stories. Like he just goes crazy on both of them, and he's got like prepared statements and stuff. It's like when you're getting a job interview, right? And you've got to have all your stories ready to go, no matter what questions they are, so you have something to talk about. But perhaps he has too much detail here, though. Like this could possibly get him in trouble, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I've always found that when somebody's telling me a story that has too much detail, I begin to suspect that some of it is getting made up. Probably just because my memory is so bad that I assume nobody could remember that many details. Yeah,
there's just this moment of feeling like you're giving me unnecessary detail, where it's like, and his name was blah blah, and he had a it's like, okay, like if you were really telling the story, would you have given me that detail?
One of the tells is when they say that like this happened and it was because of this, and I'm like, I know it's because of that. You're saying that because you're working it out in your head.
You're exactly.
But yeah, anyway, I mean, I guess we'll just have to see if his fibbing gets him into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I will say there is a feeling that we get from his interaction with Smokey Updike that he doesn't buy any of this shit, like that he knows it's all bullshit.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right.
So Jack continues to walk towards Oatly and finds himself at a literal crossroads. He's got 2 directions to go. He can either go down the Mill Road or the Dog Road, and he takes Mill Road, which leads him to a tunnel and one of the scariest scenes in the book so far. There's this whole scene, Matt, is just electric. Like there's something moving in the tunnel. At some points, it seems like it might be a dog. At some points, it seemed like it might be a man. There's something breathing. There's a smell of grease and alcohol, though, so it can't be a dog. It's got to be a person. We don't actually see what happens here, though. It's terrifying, but we don't actually see who this person was.
Yeah, I'm kind of unclear on what happens here. It's almost like he's not quite fully in the world. I don't necessarily think that's the case. It's just like it's kind of surreal.
Yeah, it is. And I have a theory here, and this is a completely unfounded theory. I have no evidence for this whatsoever.
Okay.
But in the book The Stand, which you and I are going to read later this year, there is a scene in the Lincoln Tunnel where a character is walking through the Lincoln Tunnel, and you will recognize this when you get to it, Matt, because it is one of the scariest moments I've ever read in books. It's just absolutely terrifying. So in my head, this is Peter Straub channeling Stephen King and like trying to do I could just imagine Straub being like, I really like that Lincoln Tunnel scene. I want to try my hand at something in this group project we're doing. Because we've already established the fact that the one thing we know about their work on the story is they're kind of trying specifically to copy each other's style here. And so this feels like to me just a perfect Peter Straub Lincoln Tunnel from the Stand moment here, where he kind of makes a mini version of that scene. And I got to say, he pulls it off. It's a very effective scene.
Yeah. It was definitely unnerving and scary for sure. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then Jack manages to survive getting out of the tunnel. He almost gets hit by a car because he sees two eyes in the tunnel that are terrifying him, and they're just headlights. Uh-huh. So he narrowly gets hit by a car.
Yeah.
But he finds himself in the old dying factory town that is Oatly. It looks absolutely miserable, and Jack wants to immediately change his mind and walk down to Dogtown instead. But that tunnel, that tunnel, he can't go back through that tunnel.
It's a metaphor.
And I love this moment here. The territories had shaken him. First the sight of the Queen, then that dead boy beneath the cart with half his face gone, then Morgan, the trees. But that was there, where such things could be, were perhaps even normal. Here, normality did not admit such gaudiness.
Yeah.
Oh, Jack. Oh, Jack.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I think that's even the point of this section and the next section is to directly contrasts or compare like the mirroring, the equivalence of those two worlds.
You're totally right, because we have this, he travels to the territories, he sees this as this grand adventure. We immediately find out this place is dangerous and unsafe, and so he flips back to our world and he remains there for a week because he's terrified of going back. He knows that he can travel much quicker in the territories, right? Like 6 days of walking in the territories, he could be halfway across the country. But he won't do it. He won't flip back because he's too afraid. And he's getting by okay here because suddenly now our world seems safe to him. Our world that made him miserable and unhappy, and it was dreary and dark, and he was kind of zoned out and didn't even feel like he was fulfilling his purpose. Now that is the safe world. And then what is the book going to do? It's going to immediately challenge that assumption here.
Yeah. And also there's this thing which I think I didn't necessarily think of it at the time, because I think Jack is trying not to think about the fact that we don't know what the timetable is here. Like the Queen is dying. His mom is dying.
Yeah.
Dying has a kind of implication of urgency.
Yeah.
And here he is taking his sweet time hitchhiking when he could be making much better time if he were in the other world, but he's not thinking about that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is interesting that there is definitely an assumed timetable here, but we're not actually given it. Yes, the Queen is going to die at some point, but that's all we know.
But that to me, if I were in this position, I would be like, well, then I have no time to waste because I don't know how much time I have.
Sure. But I think that goes to show just how, terrified he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So unsure of what to do next, Jack heads into the bar he sees with a help wanted sign in the window. This is Updike's Oatly tap / trap, because it's a trap, Matt.
Yep.
And that moves us into our final chapter of the week, which is chapter 9, Jack in the Pitcher Plant. And our authors jump forward in time again here, Matt. Roughly 60 hours later, we pick up with this chapter where Jack is now working as a keg runner to Smokey Updike, the owner of Updike's Oatly tap. And we're told here immediately that he has somehow managed to take him prisoner, although we don't understand exactly how yet. So once again, we're seeing some unusual structural thing going on here.
I'm loving it.
We also get this recurring beat as Jack is kind of panicking and trying to calm himself down. He's repeating, I was 6, John B. Sawyer was 6, Jackie was 6. What do you think this is about, Matt?
I mean, on the surface, this is kind of stress-induced tic.
Mm-hmm.
What it means, though, I don't know. Like it seems like he's starting to tell himself a story about himself.
Yeah.
Or maybe a story that somebody else told about him that he's recounting, but then he's kind of getting stuck. Like, okay, what happens when you were 6?
Yeah.
Obviously, this is the beginning of a story, but then we get stuck. The gears grind. He's sort of stammering. He's sort of he's stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a way to say this without making sure I spoil things. But yeah, I think the interesting thing is that he doesn't understand it either, right? Like it's not like he's refusing to listen or refusing to look at that thing. He literally this is just coming to him and he doesn't understand from where.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I took that as like just a sign of the immense stress that he's under, but maybe I should be thinking about it more as like, psychic stuff.
Maybe. So the structure of this chapter, as we talked about, is rather Kingian in its differentness, right? We start at the end with Jack Sawyer 60 hours later about to try to escape his trap. He's handing off another keg to Smokey, which, side note, I don't know how many of you folks out there have ever like handled a fully filled keg, but that shit's heavy.
It is.
Imagining a 12-year-old boy like walking a keg onto a dolly is that's an insane task to ask of someone that small. It's a lot.
Yeah, and then to run it around, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's they are heavy.
Yeah, so we start there, and then we flash back to see exactly how Jack got stuck into this pitcher plant. So again, I think this is something we've seen from King before, and he's doing it again here.
Yeah. I think this is maybe my favorite instance of starting at the end that I recall, where we don't really understand. We're just like, oh shit, what the fuck, what the hell, and then we rewind to see how it happened, and I love it. It works really well on me.
Yeah. I mean, there's this really interesting bit of confusion it creates, right? Because like on the surface, maybe you don't even understand like how could Jack be trapped here? Just leave, right? Like that's the first thing is just walk out the door and go. Like what is he going to do? And we don't really understand the full scope of that trap until later. There's also this recurring beat with this man who looks like the actor Randolph Scott that seems to be staring at Jack in a way that's making him uncomfortable. So we're like, who the hell is this guy? We don't even understand what it is about Smokey that scares him so much until we do this brief flashback to the first night, which again is an interesting structural thing that we start out 60 hours later, then we briefly flash back to the first time he dropped the keg, and then it isn't until like 8 pages later we go all the way back to the beginning of their interaction.
Yeah, you're right. That totally did happen. I kind of mentally skipped over that, but yeah. That is funny.
But I love this description. This is like our first real description of who Smokey Updike is. Jack, you just got to move faster, Smokey said. His voice sounded almost sympathetic, but his fingers dug and moved and probed. His breath smelled of the pink Canada mints he sucked almost constantly. His mail-order false teeth clicked and clacked. Sometimes there was an obscene slurping as they slipped a little, and he sucked them back into place. You got to move faster. I'm going to have to light a fire under your ass. You understand what I'm saying? Again, with the detail and the totemic objects to perfectly define a character, right? Like the dentures and the Canada mints here just perfectly defines the horror that is Smokey Updike in a way.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way of really making sure that a villain sticks with you is giving them all of these little physical attributes. It's clearly something he does on purpose, and with a lot of intention,
Yeah, and the specificity of it, just like it's not just mints, it's pink Canada mints, Like again, this is a king of ism to brand it. It's just so specific, and that specificity isn't needed to convey information, but I think you're right, it helps that information stick a little bit better.
And they're pink, by the way. So they're
literally everything in any Stephen King thing that is pink from now on, your hair is gonna stand up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at some point he read some book, in the 1970s or 19 whatever, where like pink was evil, and then he was like, "Oh, that's so interesting to make pink be evil, to make pink be the bad color, because everybody thinks of pink as like the baby color," and then he just decided that was going to be associated with evil forever.
I love it. So from here on, we flash back a couple times. First, seeing the first time Smokey hits him after he spills a keg. And I think this part is interesting, right? Because the comparison to the spilled casks of beer in the territories is not lost on Jack. We see him make this connection directly that oh, wait, this is kind of a similar beat. We're having this duality again, this rhyming between things that are happening in the territories and things that are happening here. We don't have to point this out. The book is pointing this out directly for us.
Yeah, exactly. It's this rhyming of elements between the two worlds it's interesting because mainly it's been a sort of flavor or sort of tone setting. We've had rhyming of people and events and situations. It hasn't mattered a ton plot wise, I guess. And I guess I'm just mentioning that because I'm wondering if it will.
Sure.
Yeah.
So. I mean, I don't think this book has necessarily declared, what it is about yet. I mean, like we know the plot, we know the quest, the mission, we understand all these things, but like, what is this book exploring is not really a conversation that you and I have had yet. And I think it's because that remains a little unclear for us right now. So this rhyming stuff, it's interesting. It's tantalizing. We could maybe try to drill down into what does this have to do with the themes of the novel, but we're just not there. So I don't think we can quite yet.
That's interesting. It also makes me think about the fact that I feel like a lot of the books I've read that were written by two people have suffered a little bit from a lack of clarity on the what is this book about front, because two people are not going to necessarily have exactly the same sense of what the book is about.
Yeah, that's true.
But maybe, I don't know, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here. It's just something that occurred to me.
Sure, absolutely. And it is fun. Isn't it fun that a book written by two people is a book about duality?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I noticed that, and thank you for saying it out loud, because it's like, well, there might be some divergence in how we see things. Well, let's make that be the theme, Yeah,
they're just twinners of each other. That's all it is. Yeah. So 8 pages into this chapter, Matt, we finally flash all the way back to the point where we left off when we entered the chapter, which is Jack first walking into the bar. So oftentimes we ask ourselves, why the decision to structure things this way? We talk about how King does it a lot, but we ask ourselves, why do it this way? Jump forward in time just to then jump to flash back. And I think this is a great example of why in this particular chapter, because during the entire meeting with Smokey, we now know that this is going to go bad. So King and Straub during the whole initial meeting can put in stuff like this line here where it says, some 60 hours later, swamping out the men's toilet at 12:30 in the morning with his sweaty hair hanging in his eyes, Jack thought, no, he knew that it was his own stupid confidence that allowed the trap to spring shut, and it had shut the moment he sat down opposite Smokey Updike, although he had not known it then. The Venus flytrap is able to close on this hapless, insectile victims. The pitcher plant, with its delicious smell and its deadly, glassy smooth sides, only waits for some flying asshole of a bug to buzz on down and inside, where it finally drowns in the rainwater the pitcher collects. In Oatly, the pitcher was full of beer instead of rainwater. That was the only difference. So because we flash forward first, only to flash back, we get to have this stuff in the initial meeting, right? Whereas, well, I mean, and that's actually an interesting point. Actually, I think it would be rather Kingian to, without the flashback, just put this in there and just allow your audience to react to it, not knowing how badly this is going to go, not knowing that he's going to get trapped yet. Yeah,
you can see it go either way.
Sure,
it's interesting. It's funny because we haven't talked about this in a minute, but like I feel like all this is definitely written by King, and it's like, okay, but Matt, you can't feel like the whole book is definitely written by King. So
sure,
maybe this is Straub. I don't know.
Maybe it's Straub trying to do King, and that's why he's messing with the structure intentionally. It's like,
exactly.
I've noticed you do this a lot, Steve. Let me do this for you.
Totally.
So Jack gives Smokey his story number 2. It's the abusive father sob story. And Jack here thinks it works. And as I just read in the line above this, it's his confidence and his assuredness in his ability to put on these performances that kind of gets him in trouble here. Smokey basically knew this was bullshit from the beginning. And he gives him the job, but knowing that he's kind of got this kid trapped. And our first night in Smokey's bar begins.
Yeah. So Smokey... is such a fascinating villain, and especially in contrast with Osmond. And I think that's one of the fun things we can do with this setting is we can introduce you to one type of villain, and then very quickly after that, introduce you to a very different type of villain, and talk about the differences between them. So, Smokey, the terror of Smokey is that he comes off as reasonable. He's just a businessman. He's just offering you a job for a couple days. He's intelligent, he's perceptive, he's manipulative in this sort of casual way that implies that he's been doing this for years. And there's none of the flamboyance that Osmond displays. There's none of the just like obvious and delighting in sadism.
Yeah.
But you get the sense that this guy is just as bad. He's probably hurt people just as badly, and I just love these being these kind of two, like, we have kind of a fantasy lens on an evil dude who's gonna manipulate you and fuck you over, and then we have, well, this is what this guy's like in real life, and he comes off as, oh, that's just Smokey. He runs the bar,
Yeah, I like that, because if we carry forward our narrative of the territories being like the world of story, which I think they were kind of set up to be that at the very beginning of the book, right? Then Osmond is a storybook version of what evil is, whereas Smokey is a real world version of what evil is, which comes off as good natured and kind, and yeah, I'm just helping people out. And like, I think that the most interesting part is when Smokey has his hand on Jack, and like, from an outside perspective, it just looks like he's like, putting his hand on him and supporting him and talking to him through the things, but actually he's like digging into his body, like he's like gripping him so tightly that he's like digging into his flesh. And that is Smokey, right? Where he'll put a kind hand on you, but that kind hand is actually punishment. And whereas Osmond is just gonna publicly whip you to death. I mean, and like, you're absolutely right that the thing that the existence of the territories allows us to do is have these immediate compare and contrast. So we have, Carter spills beer in the territories. We see this Carter immediately punished for publicly, brutally and terribly. We have Jack lifting a keg, spills beer, does it wrong. And we see that, and we see the differences between, and we can draw all these differences and kind of start to get an idea of what is this world and what is that world, and what are the differences between the worlds, and what are they saying about, existence, living in the world that Jack lives in,
Yeah, I like that. I don't know where King was in his journey, in his struggle with substance abuse when he wrote this book, but can't help but notice that both, what you were just saying about the mirroring and the mirroring of the beer spills, and the idea that like this town is drowning in beer, and then you have the people of the territories, sort of also drowning their sorrows in beer.
Yeah,
it's a very sort of negative connotation toward substance use, basically.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, if you'd ask King, he'd probably say he knew all along that he had this problem, and he just wasn't dealing with it. So, I mean, over and over again, we see characters struggling with substance abuse, and that portrayed negatively. Yeah, I think you're right. The image of a pitcher plant filled with beer is perfect, right? That like this delicious, wonderful liquid that makes you feel good. The smell brings you in, but it's just a trap, and you'll be stuck there and drown in it. Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful image for sure.
Yeah. I don't have any reason to believe this or anything along those lines, but like, did Jack's father drink a lot? Is that a thing?
I don't think we know. I mean, the one piece of evidence we have for this is that he told Morgan about the territories while drunk.
Yeah,
that's really the only piece of evidence we have.
Maybe that's why it's in my head a little bit. I guess the other thing that's been nagging at me is the fact that, Jack, he lost his father relatively recently, right?
Yes, relatively.
So it's just interesting that he never really thinks about that.
Yeah.
I guess I would have thought that. I guess I'm wondering, like, is he really just like he's already processed that and moved on, or is that the kind of thing where one of the purposes of this journey is confronting the fact that he hasn't processed that, and that he needs to, literally remember the face of his father to move on and face the trials that he needs to conquer.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I think we'll revisit that as we go, but I will say that I think at least part of Jack's extreme grief around the death of his mother is kind of wrapped up in the loss of his father as well.
Yeah.
I think that the loneliness that he feels throughout this journey is a constant reminder of that he's already lost one parent, and the other is, on their way out the door.
That's the vibe I get as well.
Sure. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you about this interesting beat that we see here in this chapter with the telephone, right? Early in the chapter, we have this beat about how Jack would never touch the telephone again for $1,000, but we're not told why. We have no idea why. And here in this moment, at the very beginning of the story, we have the phone ring, and our character currently has no reason to dread the thing yet. The reason that he dreads it is still to come. And yet he describes it, the book describes it as a black slug stuck to the wall. It's such a negative, monstrous description of this thing that is ostensibly, in the moment, just a phone that hasn't done anything sinister or evil yet. But over and over again throughout the chapter, we're kind of just peppered in with these, like, every time the phone rings, like, everyone stops. And, like, there's this weird moment of confusion, and, like, Jack is immediately uncomfortable, and we just don't have a reason for it yet.
Yeah, definitely setting up a bunch of elements to pay attention to that I don't.
Yeah,
I don't know what it means.
It does make me wonder if the flashback here to the beginning is textually in the story Jack remembering these moments, and so the narration is coloring events that haven't happened yet with those future events, right? So, like, perhaps in real time, when Jack saw the phone, he would not have described it this way. But in his recall of the moment, we're seeing the narration reflect the later event that recolors the stuff. I don't know, but that's interesting.
I think that makes sense to me, but I'm not. I don't remember the actual text clearly enough to say.
Sure. So later that night, Jack is puking up in the men's room after having cleaned it, because drunk men are, and I'm not kidding here, some of the most disgusting creatures on this entire planet, right? Yeah. And I say this as a man who has been drunk. Drunk men are just the things that they do. It's disgusting.
I can't think of any animal that would be that disgusting. So yeah, that's one of the most, maybe the most disgusting creature.
Let's just go ahead and declare it. Drunk men, the most disgusting creatures on planet Earth. There we go.
Yeah.
So Jack breaks down, and this breakdown comes in the form of his mother. I love this line here. Suddenly, his mother's face was before him, more beautiful than it had ever been on any movie screen, her eyes large and dark and sorrowing. He saw her alone in their rooms at the Alhambra, a cigarette smoldering forgotten in the ashtray beside her. She was crying for him. His heart seemed to hurt so badly that he thought he would die from love for her and want of her. And I love this because a lot of this week's reading seems to be Jack kind of ping-ponging back and forth between, the child version of himself and the adult version of himself. Like, he'll have these moments of utter despair where in this moment he's basically saying, I want my mommy. And then he'll, like, collect himself and come together. We kind of saw it in an accelerated form when we leave him in the tool shed, basically at his lowest moment, and then we resume with him, and hey, he's doing pretty good. He's transitioned to adult Jack, and in this moment we see he just comes to this despair, has this I want my mommy moment, and then does what the book describes as a simple tightening of the mind to kind of collect himself and maybe transition back to adult or older version of Jack that just handles the stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about in context of all these other books we read recently. How much of growing up is this tightening of the mind against adversity? Yeah, until it just kind of sticks that way. I think this is just yet another sign that King is really fascinated by the question of what growing up actually is. Yeah.
I mean, he always writes these child characters. And they're always on the cusp of like we've talked about before. It's rarely we hang out with like a 6-year-old, right, or a 7-year-old. Or they're always 11, 12, 13. This age, this liminal age where you're about to cross a threshold into something else, and that is absolutely what's going on here with Jack as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So I love this moment here where he tells Lori that he's leaving. And Lori's a character you and I haven't talked about very much yet, but she is the bartender at the bar. And Lori's basically like, when Jack says he's leaving, she's like, yeah, sure, man, whatever. And just this relationship between Lori and Smokey is a really complicated one, huh? It's not the best thing, right? We see that he is very abusive to her, but we also see, again, through Jack's very, very observant behavior, we see that she, not that she enjoys the abuse, but I think what the book says is that she feels like she deserves it in a way, which is just horrifying.
Yeah, or this idea that, like, this due to her upbringing, this is how she thinks a man is supposed to behave toward a woman, and this is even if it upsets her, it's like, well, this is how it's supposed to be, though.
Yeah. And maybe she's just as stuck here as Jack is, but much further along in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the types of, bad person in the world is basically a person who's a victim, but they've become a complicit victim. So they're, she's certainly not going to help Jack. And she might even, try to stop him if she could, because if he gets away, then maybe Smokey will be mad at her,
Yeah, take it out on her for sure. Yeah,
exactly. So that's it. I'm very interested to see where things go with Lori, because I think that'll help. That's the kind of thing where you said a second ago, we don't really know what this book is about. What you do with an interaction like that, does she get redeemed or is she stuck, and why? That's kind of a mini thesis statement on what we're doing here. Yeah,
no, I like that. I like that a lot. Great. So we'll see. Yep. So the next day, Jack gets his pay, which includes being docked for the 2 hamburgers that he was provided by Smokey and the ginger ale he drank after he got sick that night. I love this moment so much, Matt. This is like so deliciously evil. Like just to be this like fucking asshole-ish about a couple of hamburgers and maybe like at cost 2 cents worth of ginger ale. It's so wonderful. It's just the perfect kind of ticky-tacky bullshit where Smokey's just like, well, I never told you it was free. Yeah, but you said, let's get you some hamburgers. Like, come on, man. It's exactly the type of thing that we were talking about with the Osmond versus Smokey thing, where this is evil in this really kind of hidden in reasonableness type of way.
Yeah, because it's all that's the scary thing about it is he's kind of pushing Jack with this petty bullshit, but then when Jack's like, well, fuck you, I'm going to leave, that's when that's when everything turns.
Yeah,
and you realize
the mask kind of comes off. Yeah.
Oh, this is what's really going. So like it's all backed up by just like a willingness to be really truly evil.
Yeah. And like he kind of builds a situation where, he's still being evil with this petty bullshit, as you said, but the thing he's kind of training into you is if you just accept this form of evil, you don't have to see the one that comes after when I take my mask off, which is even more insidious in its way.
Yeah.
I do love the way Jack kind of like is so indignant and pissed off about this, though, right? Like his reaction to this is so boisterous and outspoken, where he's just like, you're a cheat. He just like loses it. It reminds me of when he kind of mouthed off to the clerk of the hotel a little bit here, where he seems like this fairly reserved, quiet kid who, generally isn't going to talk back to elders or whatever. But if you behave a certain way, he has a bit of a temper and he's going to like go off on you. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it is because we admire him for standing up for himself, but he kind of does it in an immature way.
Yeah, right.
Which I think this is a character trait that we'll probably see evolve in some way, because it's interesting because like mouthing off is a bit of a Russell conjugation of standing up for yourself.
Yeah.
It's mouthing off when you do it unsuccessfully and come off looking like a child.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. He's kind of throwing a bit of a temper tantrum here.
Yeah. Right.
And like you said, Smokey tells him how he is. He didn't say the stuff was free and he can go ahead and leave if he wants to. But Smokey has an old friend on the police force, a friend he'll call the second Jack walks out the door. And if little Jackie boy walks out, he'll come collect him and bring him back to wherever he's going. So suddenly, Matt, we realize exactly how Jack is a prisoner here, and that's where the chapter ends, with that moment of realization and that big old smile on Smokey's lips as the chapter ends. Ugh,
it's such a wonderfully insidious idea, because you're like you finish the chapter and you're like, well, that can't be it. Like surely there's some way he could get out of this, and then you realize like, no, it's this little isolated town. There's only one way. I don't know if there's only one way in and out, but basically it's very like narrowly circumscribed, and the police in a town like this are going to have unlimited power. So like, how is he going to get out of this? It's very good. It's a very dramatic situation.
It is. It's wonderful. Yeah. And that is a good question. How is he going to get out of this? Any ideas how he's going to escape from this predicament?
Well, I'm confused, or maybe missed something. Did he still has his bottle, right?
He does, yeah.
So, I mean, like, that's the funny thing is at any point in this time that he's been stuck here, he could just go take a swig from his bottle and he'd be in the territories.
Yeah, but he's terrified of the territories. That's why this worked really well, right? It's because we've given our character enough motivation to where that is a last bit resort. And I think you're right that like at a last resort, he can do that.
I think that's probably what we're doing is either he's going to find some clever way out of it, which would be fun, or he's going to just be pressed to the point where he is forced to take a swig.
And when the chapter begins, when we're in the most up-to-date timeline of the chapter, we basically do learn that Jack says that he's getting out of here tomorrow. Like he's it's been 60 hours. He realizes he's stuck, but he's getting out of here. So maybe that's what he's thinking. Maybe he's finally been driven to that point. I
mean, my guess is that he's going to try to escape on foot and it's not going to work. And he's going to have to take a swig. That's my Matt's prediction.
All right.
For the day.
Matt's Musings. What was it called again?
Matt's Musings. Yeah.
Someone said they wanted us to bring that back, but I think we do it just informally. Like we don't like keep a spreadsheet.
Yeah. We missed a couple weeks in there.
Just a couple. Just 50.
Just 50 or 70 or whatever. Yeah.
All right, but that is going to do it for this week's reading. So we leave Jack in this predicament. We still don't know the creepiness with the phone, and we don't know quite how he's going to get out of here yet. So we'll find out next week.
We will.
All right, Matt, let's move on to our discussion question section for the week. Our question last week was what? What was the question, Matt?
What is your favorite book written by more than one author and why?
Are you sure it wasn't just Why is Good Omens a Good Book? Because I feel like that was what the question was.
It seems like, according to the people who answered the question, that was what the question was. So let's get on to those. Yep. Number 1 from Baby Can You Dig Your Sam? Of course, the answer to this week's question is Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. They really perfectly complement each other and combine their distinctive brands of humor to create a frequently laugh-out-loud funny story about Armageddon. The book is both irreverent and sincere. It conveys both cynicism and optimism. Eccentric characters abound, as does the deliciously British humor. But behind the absurdity and whimsy is a morality tale about an angel and a demon struggling with their existential ethical obligations that are in conflict with the love they have for this rock we call Earth and the delightful humans that inhabit it. Yeah. We read this book for book club a while back. We had a great conversation about it.
It was like our second book ever on book club, actually.
Yeah. It's funny how I think I liked it a lot, and I didn't think like, oh, this is the best book I've ever read, but like that is a book that has just really stuck with me.
Yeah, me too.
Ever since.
Did you ever watch the show?
No, I haven't watched the show. No.
I can't remember if I finished the season or not. I might need to do that. But I enjoyed it for what it was, for sure. Mm-hmm. And they're making a second season, which I don't know how they're doing that because I'm pretty sure the first season ends at the end of the book. Maybe I'm wrong with that. I don't know.
It's just going to be the continuing adventures of Aziraphale and Crowley. That's all. That's what people want, right?
I probably yes, actually. Next, we have Walking Dude 22, who says, my answer to discussion question is Good Omens, in which Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett explore the apocalypse through the eyes of two supernatural characters who mean to stop it. The book is fantastically fun, and the adaptation is also remarkable. I live in dread of season 2. so people aren't positive on the prospect of a season 2.
Interesting. Okay.
There we go.
All right. Karina 2020 says, my answer to the discussion question is, of course, Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and the late, great Terry Pratchett. It is a perfect collaboration of writers to create a world on the verge of disaster and hilarious and intelligent story. The characters are so engaging, and once you start reading, it is impossible to stop until you reach the end.
Pear Jane says, well, darn it, everyone beat me to the correct answer, which is Good Omens. My kids and I have consumed it in audio adaptation form, miniseries form, and someday they'll pick up the book and love it as much as I did. But since we're all brilliant people in perfect agreement, I'll pick... See, the problem is I haven't read many co-written books, pretty much just Good Omens and The Talisman and Gwendy's Button Box. I tend not to be attracted to two author books, probably because I suspect that's what I love about one author would be diluted by the other. And truth be told, The Talisman is one of those books. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but feel like it gets bogged down by Straub's slow pacing. It doesn't help when we get celebrities teaming up with best-selling authors to publish autobiographical fantasies thinly veiled as mysteries. Maybe The reason we're all giving the same answer is because truly great fiction collaborations are rare gems. Given that I once made a nice living as a ghostwriter and collaborator, my entire answer feels deeply ironic. I almost said Ghostbuster. I almost made Pear Jane a Ghostbuster.
Yeah, that's amazing. Pear Jane, a Ghostbuster and a ghostwriter. That's I mean, quite a career.
Really just carving out your niche there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'll save my comments on the general phenomenon of two writer books for later, but sure. I agree with some of the ambivalence that Pear Jane is referring to here. Mm-hmm. Darkbeer Rules says, though I'm a huge Terry Pratchett fan, even went to a Discworld con years ago and actually met the man. Well, actually, let's just say I stood in front of him overawed while he signed the book for me. I hate to admit I haven't read Good Omens yet. In fact, I can't think of any co-authored books I've read off the top of my head. But your discussion question reminded me immediately of a story that, in internet lore, was supposedly written in tandem by two students taking a creative writing class. It's too long to reprint here, but takes only a minute or two to read, and it's always good for a chuckle. So here's the link.
Have you ever heard of this? I have not heard of this story.
I'm only now seeing it. Let me. I don't recognize this at all. So no. No.
All right, moving on to AL84001, who says, "Ha! I'm not falling for your obvious trap to shill Good Omens, however great it happens to be, and it is great. Shame on you. Surely that'll be the answer to at least half the listeners." You are right. Instead, I'll play the wild card and say my favorite story written by more than one author is A Song of Ice and Fire. George teed it up spectacularly with 5 of the most engaging, layered, and intricate plotted novels I have ever read, the other author being the summer intern HBO hired to write the novelization of the final season of Game of Thrones. They also say now whoever is reading this needs to make a badum-ching comedic sound. So there you go. I tease George, but seriously, right, goddamn you. It would go down in history as one of the literary world's greatest tragedies if we don't get a proper ending to that saga. Tragically cruel, almost like the Red... Oh no, is George R. R. Martin planning to go full meta and tell us that the Lannisters send their regards by never completing his opus and thusly curb stopping our hopes and dreams for ever reading The Winds of Winter? No, I think he's just bored of those books. I don't think he really likes writing them anymore. Yeah. So he's not doing it.
There's a great meme that a friend sent me of it's got Patrick Rothfuss, George R. R. Martin, and Brandon Sanderson. And the meme says, these 3 authors have a pact to shave every time they finish a novel. And Brandon Sanderson, of course, being totally smooth-cheeked and baby-faced at all times.
Yep, that's great.
Because he has always just finished a novel.
Yep.
All right, Drunk Phoenix 26 says, for the discussion question, I don't recall reading a lot of co-authored books, so my response is a bit of non-spoilery cop-out by saying Black House, the sequel to Talisman. I've always had trouble getting into Talisman, although it does pick up as Jack starts traveling. Black House, on the other hand, is similar to other King works, where you tend to jump right in. Plus, just from the title, you can assume we're going to see a house as a major plot point, similar to the Marsden House in Salem's Lot, or the Dutch Hill House from the Wastelands. I love King's creepy houses.
That's interesting because I almost think the exact opposite, where Black House I had some trouble getting into, but I really love the Talisman from the beginning. So we'll see. Matt.
We'll see which one I end up liking more.
Yeah. Sheev Millerband says, I haven't read many books written by 2 or more authors, which I think is a common theme in this question. Maybe I should have done an inventory of co-authored books before I asked the question. So I'll go with The Gathering of the Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. The book gets a lot of flack among Wheel of Time fans because Sanderson had trouble early on writing fan favorite character Matt Cawthon, but I'm in the minority that doesn't care much about Matt, so I hardly noticed. What hit me in the book was the incredible journey Rand takes through the book, hitting his absolute lowest point in the entire series and doing some absolutely horrific stuff. Off the top of my head, I know Jordan wrote the book's prologue, but I'm not sure what else. So it's not a collaborative effort like The Talisman and Black House, but both names are on the cover, so I'm counting it. Veins of Gold is the emotional peak of Wheel of Time. Don't at me. I'm going to assume that you're horribly offended by everything that was just said here, Matt. That is just gibberish to me. But
well, I was going to say, yeah, you are the minority. But then your name is Sheev Millerband, which is so funny that you've offset the anger that you've stoked in me. It's funny. I keep thinking to myself, I need to go back and listen to at least the last books of the Wheel of Time, because I honestly did have a bad attitude about it. I was just disappointed. I was disappointed that Jordan didn't finish them and they didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
Anyway,
Understandable, I think. Again, I haven't read them, so I don't know. But I mean, so I guess that's the thing, Matt. Would you rather the series not have been finished at all? Like in the George R. R. Martin case, if God forbid he passes away and they decide that someone else, maybe Brandon Sanderson's going to pick up A Song of Ice and Fire and finish it, would you rather the series go unfinished or be written by someone else?
Pretty ambivalent, honestly, between those two, because the way I look at it, honestly, like this sounds mean, but as far as I'm concerned, The Wheel of Time is not finished. It was a different story was written by Brandon Sanderson,
Gotcha.
and
Sure.
and it sort of follows probably what Robert Jordan intended, but it's not. I mean, that's like saying if you wrote a story and then you died and somebody else finished it, it's not the same story.
Yeah.
Like.
Totally. I mean, like had Stephen King died in that van accident, like no one could finish The Dark Tower like Stephen King could finish The Dark Tower. And like I had not read the series at that point, so I was not emotionally invested. But had I read the first 4 books, I couldn't imagine someone else waltzing in and saying, No, I got his notes. I got this. It's just not. Yeah, it's not the same thing.
And Song of Ice and Fire even more because that's a book that just sprawls and meanders, and I'm certain that he doesn't know exactly how it's going to end yet. So
now I can't stop imagining Brandon Sanderson writing A Song of Ice and Fire. It's just like completely opposite writing styles and desires and storytelling.
It's just opposite sensibilities in every way.
In every way.
Like Jon Snow as a character exists to disappoint you. Yeah. All right. Next question from Felidao. They say, I can't recall many books I read with multiple authors besides The Talisman and Black House. The only thing that comes to mind is a YA series from my childhood called Strange Matter, written by Johnny Ray Barnes and Marty M. Engel, which centered on the young teenagers of a town called Fairfield and their encounters with various supernatural phenomena. Strange Matter was sort of like a coked up and roided out Goosebumps that had just downed a dozen cans of Red Bull, and was one of my favorite series during my elementary school and middle school years.
Wow, that sounds... coked up Goosebumps. That's right up my alley.
I need to buy these for my kids.
Coach Wargo says, Good Omens is excellent and worthy of all the mentions it is going to get from listeners, so let me throw out something different. The Jester by James Patterson and Andrew Gross. I know what you're thinking. Is he really talking about James Patterson, the purveyor of multitudes of forgettable run-of-the-mill police procedurals, courtroom dramas, and political thrillers? The man that King called a terrible writer, but he's very successful. All of the criticism is fair, but with The Jester, he and Gross tapped into something that just struck me right. The story is set in medieval France, a setting that has always drawn me in. In short, a man returns from the Crusades to find that his wife has been kidnapped and held prisoner. He becomes a jester so he can infiltrate the court and free her from her dungeon. It is mainly the setting and the humor of The Jester that make me enjoy an otherwise forgettable book. I'd also like to mention the nonfiction book The Corner by David Seidman and Edward Burns, an excellent book about the drug market in Baltimore that takes its toll on the people in the inner city neighborhoods. It was adapted by HBO into a miniseries, which then led to Simon and Burns creating The Wire.
Wow.
Which is probably something you've never heard of, The Wire. Not a little not very well-known show on HBO.
Yeah, I've never heard of it. Wow, thanks, Coach Wargo. That's a couple of very interesting things I never heard of. Fascinating.
I don't think I've ever read a Patterson book in my life.
I might have read one, but that might have not been Patterson, actually.
Okay.
Good story, Matt. Speaking of Matt's, here we have an answer from Matt's Edwards. The book that immediately came to mind for the discussion question was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone. The concept, prose, and format for the story were so delightfully original and captivating that I actually wrote a short fanfic for it on Do the Right Thing. The style of writing letters back and forth between red and blue lent itself to the co-authorship of the novel, and I imagine must have been a real joy to write.
Yeah, when we asked this question, this is kind of the book that popped into my head because we did a book club on it and I enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, I think there are two different ways to do the co-authorship, right? There is, you just write the thing and it's one book like the Talisman, but there's also this idea that this book is doing where it's very clear which author is writing which person, because each author takes a character and that the chapter is from that character's perspective. So the author writes that character and then we switch, and it works because they're stylistically different because they're letters. So, the difference in writing styles just becomes a part of the book. And I think this is a great example of this concept being used to its fullest extent. I loved this book.
Yeah, me too. I remember our comment being that the two co-writers, I wonder if their spouses were worried about the subtext of them writing love letters back and forth.
They definitely get some hot and heavy, these love letters. Yeah,
they were. Yeah.
The Amazing Duck 42 says it's obviously Good Omens. I'm kidding. Since that's the clear winner, I'll go instead with my current favorite writing duo, Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Craner, who write Welcome to Night Vale, a podcast first and now world expanded into several books. I think their style can sort of be explained as soft horror, and they have an exquisite grasp of how to compellingly write an unreliable narrator. Night Vale especially is mostly unsettling and dips equally into absurdist comedy as it does into outright horror. It's been interesting to listen to the podcast change over the years. It does seem to be getting darker as the story goes on. An honorable mention goes to Jeffrey Craner and his other writing partner, Jana Mathewson, who write a podcast Within the Wires and have recently released a book that in that universe called You Feel It Just Below the Ribs. It's different stories written in an alternate 20th century. Something terrible happened and humanity perhaps overreacted. This is cool. So podcast version of this question.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like that. Cool idea.
I listened to Welcome to Night Vale for a long time and then I just kind of stopped.
Yeah, me too. I felt like at a certain point I had hit I got it.
Yeah.
Got the premise. Cool. Just Stand 8460 says, since I cannot think of any others besides The Talisman and Black House, both of which I enjoyed and struggled with for different reasons, I'll just toss out the annoying answer of The Gunslinger by Stephen King as a young man and later revised by Stephen King, the father, a more seasoned writer. After hearing the analyses done on this podcast, I cannot deny the amount he has changed as an author throughout his career. Like Spielberg, who would have never left his kids behind at Devil's Tower in Close Encounters, the older King sees this early work differently and makes choices to modify the story and tee himself up for a redemption opportunity, which he felt strongly that Roland needed. Yeah. Lame answer. Boo, whatevs, he says.
It's not a lame answer. It's a creative answer, and I like it.
Yeah. I mean, sure. Like how many people start something when they're that young and then revisit it that many decades later when they're now a super successful author? Yeah.
And I mean, how much changing do you do over 40 years? Yeah. A very different person.
Yeah.
So it counts. It
does.
Complicated 9519 says, my answer to discussion question is the authors of the Warrior books, 3 ladies who go under one named Erin Hunter. That is my answer pretty much because the only collab books I know of, and they caught my eye in middle school. I grew out of them before finishing the final 2 series, but it does have great world building and interesting story for a young teen/tween reader. Yeah, never heard of that. I think I wonder how many of these books are co-authored books that we just don't know about, right? Like where they just go under one pen name. Like I think the Expanse book series is that, right? Where James S.A. Corey is not a person. That's 2 people that just picked a pen name for their project together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that probably happens a lot more than we realize.
Yeah.
My answer to this was not, well, not my favorite, actually. My not favorite, my decidedly not favorite was a book I read a long time ago, which was by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle. The name sounds familiar because that's who he based Lisa Tully on. Oh. And the book is called Windhaven. And I did not really like it. But what's funny is I probably didn't like it because I was young and I didn't get that George R. R. Martin was never going to give you a satisfying conclusion or make you like feel like the characters were awesome, and that's just not the kind of writer he is.
Did he not like this woman? Because that's not a good character.
Yeah, I think maybe I think he just wanted to have her name be in there.
I can just imagine I'm naming a character in my book after you, and thanks. She reads the book and is like, "What the fuck,
George?
Is this how you see me, George?
Yeah.
Nursing my 8-year-old son still?
Yeah. And then you push me out of a window? All right. Last answer from Sigma. The answer is the Communist Manifesto.
That is technically true, right? There's two people that wrote that. There's Marx, and I don't remember who the other person was, but I'm pretty sure it was co-authored.
Hold on. I don't know this information. I'm looking it up right now. It was written by Engels and Marx. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course. There we go. I should know that.
I guess I should too. Now I do.
There you go. Now everybody does. Everybody in the world.
I always will.
All right, Matt. That is it for this week's question. Thank you, everyone, for submitting answers. What, my friend, is next week's discussion question?
What is your favorite story that is based on the Odyssey?
That's a good question. There are a lot of them, and Matt has decided this is one of them.
That's right. I at the beginning of this episode, we didn't end up talking about it a ton, but I think that, I mean, yes, it is. It is. I'm just gonna say confidently, this is a story based on the Odyssey, and there are certainly a lot of them. So
yes, and if you're sitting here struggling to think of one, just Google stories based on the Odyssey, and you will find how many there are, because there are a shit ton. And so you might learn something and say, hey, I love that book. I didn't even realize that the outline is loosely based on the Odyssey, and now I want to answer that one. So
yeah, I have one in mind right now.
I'm looking this up right now. Is Don Quixote based on the Odyssey? I don't know if that's true.
Oh man, I don't know, man. I don't know if I buy that.
Is the Hobbit what is this list? Is the Hobbit based on the Odyssey? Is it just movies where people travel? Is that the curriculum?
All right, folks, we're gonna need you to use your discretion in books that are actually credibly based on the Odyssey. All right.
All right, everyone, that's it for us this week. Next week, the Talisman continues as we continue with part 2, The Road of Trials, and discuss chapters 10 through 14.
Yeah, remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, this is the time right now, this very minute. Do it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts. I'm sure there are some of you out there that are listening via our webpage right now. And while we love you going to our website, there's much more travel-friendly places to listen to us. So try one of those out.
That's right. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Lucy T and Jacob C.
And of course, if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is and will always remain absolutely okay. There are still tons of ways to help us out, like sharing the podcast with friends and family. Do you have someone that hasn't read the Talisman that you wanted to read the Talisman? Maybe use us as your motivation to get them to check this book out. And of course, please continue to leave those rating and reviews. They really do help us. This week's Spotlight review comes from Sean626, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great listen for King fans. I love Stephen King, and especially the Dark Tower series. Sadly, no one I know shares the same passion. Scott and Matt do a great job at deep diving into the books and having some fun sidebars as well. When I found this, they had already gone into season 2. I listened to the entire backlog just to hear them chat about my favorite book. I highly recommend this podcast. I am hoping that they eventually get to some of King's non-Dark Tower books like It or The Shining. Would love to hear their thoughts and analysis on those too." Well, we would love to do them. We're just very careful at what we commit to. So no word on that yet, but never say never.
Yes, we try to keep our word.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, we'll see you right back here next week as Jack attempts to escape his smoky predicament. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.